What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of a Thinking Man's podcast. I'm your host. My name is Joseph PIRCHER, and with me, as always, my good friend Tommy Stiles. Tommy, what's going on, man?
Not much, brother. Getting ready to fly into the tundra tomorrow.
Yeah, hell of a time to go back. Like you were saying, last year was the same thing. That time of the year is kind of cursed up there in Michigan. So, did you look for your actual area? Or are you guys going to get hammered with snow or what?
My mom already alerted me that it's coming. So it's it's ice, it's snow, it's cold, it's just garbage. So what's
Yeah.
weird though is we actually have a weather advisory here the first 2 days I'm gone, like cold, and for
Oh, no
us
kidding.
it's
Oh,
like
wild.
frost, but it's a weather advisory.
Man, I drove out to Arizona with one of my friends, as you know, and we purposely did kind of like a longer, slower, just cross country trip from Jersey. I, for the first time in my life, have not seen an inch of snow the entire winter in New Jersey. The day we left, it snowed in Jersey, and we're like, oh hell yeah, like we missed it. Dude, we got to the north part of Texas, like Amarillo, and it fucking snowed and hailed like it was the Northeast, dude. It
Oh
was
yeah.
wild. It was wild, wild. Like, and like we were going through, it was like 2 a.m. So like there's
Yeah.
trucks fucking flipped over on the interstate and people pulled over and all sorts of crazy shit, man. It was wild. Those
That was the ice storm protect. They like were in a state of emergency.
dude, they man, living out there, those people and just the state of Texas are just not prepared for
Oh,
anything like sub 30 degrees. Like the infrastructure isn't prepared for it. The people lose their fucking minds. Um,
dude, heavy rain here throws people off, like
yeah, yeah.
pulled over with their hazard lights on, like not willing to drive.
Oh man. Well, all right. That should show everybody our age that we just spent 5 minutes talking about the weather. So on this episode, we are going to be discussing a topic that really we could discuss until the end of time, but it's based off of a cool discussion that we had going on in the private Facebook group for the show. So if you're not already part of that group and you listen to this and you want to be part of it, find us on Facebook at Thinking Man's Podcast group. Um, we kind of carry what we're doing with the show into Facebook and continue conversations and kind of dive deeper into things. So it's a cool little community that we're trying to build up. Besides that, Tommy and I both offer online coaching. Tommy and I are both on Instagram, all that stuff. The links will be below. And so the topic is how much volume. So in the group, one of the guys asked, um, general question kind of pertaining to maintenance volume. I think he was in a phase where he was maybe pulling back gear or pulling back food, something like that. And he was trying to get an idea of a general number or I guess summary of maintenance volume per body part. And there was a lot of good posts. Dom Puza, shout out to him. He made an awesome post in there, really insightful. You made a good post as well. And then I yesterday I saw it and left a comment and it gave me the idea to talk about this. So, man, it's such a wide ranging topic. I'm going to kind of just kick it over to you and wherever you want to start with it. I'm sure we won't be lacking in topics to cover. So kick us off, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, how much volume is like the age old debate? Like this
Yeah.
one has been going on as long as I've been on social media. I hear this thing. You get people from different camps who want to believe they know better than others, but ultimately, I mean, we could preface this whole thing with everything we always say: context is king. There are no absolutes. So if you're listening to this, and I want to make this a point to start saying this more, like the things we talk about, like it's never meant to be black and white. Like what we say is not, it's usually off of our experience or things we've learned along the way from our own journeys and then working with others. It's never going to be like, and I'm trying to be more cognizant of this, of not to deliver my message as like, this is how much volume you should do, no less, no more. Like I definitely want you to, if you're listening to this, listen with an open mind, and it's meant to just make you think and apply what you're hearing along the way. That being said, training volume is something that I don't really care what science says, because there's so many factors within our world that science is never, like, they're not enhanced on PEDs. They're not factoring in the intensity that's necessary for bodybuilding training. They're just training, the subjects they're training are just training kind of like your everyday person in the gym. Like, there's not really a goal at hand to get better. So the studies are kind of not as valid as the results they're going to give. So to me, I don't care what they say about volume. I care about what I've learned from clients, and then what other people in our industry have put out as far as information they're providing. So I wanted to get that out ahead of time. But
yeah, just to jump in real quick too, if I
yeah.
can, Tommy, like you were saying, not only, I would take it even a step further. Like you were saying that it's almost like that those studies are on the everyday average person in the gym. I'd take it a step further. Most of the time, they're not the average person in the gym. They've
True.
never even stepped foot in a gym. Most of the time,
Yeah.
they're like untrained undergrads.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so these are like, you know, late teens, early 20s people that have never trained or don't consistently train. So just to give you an idea of how far outside of our particular little niche demographic it is, that should give you an idea. And I'm someone that references science a ton, as you guys know that listen to the show. But just to give you an idea, like big picture, how should you be thinking about these things? I think we've come back to, hopefully full circle, that experience is king in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
Like what we're seeing on the ground in bodybuilding is always going to be years ahead of whatever comes out in research.
Yeah. And I think, you know, evidence-based, the evidence that you have for yourself from your experience is going to trump anything that 100%. Stanford University puts out.
Yeah.
So,
right. And then especially anything that besides your own 15-year journey that you help, you know, hundreds of people over the course of the years. You've conducted your own real life study on that particular demographic, more so than anything that research could give us.
Yeah. I think with volume, you know, to get this thing going off, it's like there has to be effort and intensity have to be established as the metrics. I think I talked about this in a previous episode. Like, I want you to learn how to take a working set to proper failure before you start to think about volume. Yeah. And then once you have that in place and you know you can do that, then you can start looking at how to add more volume, because volume is necessary. That's what drives more blood into the muscle. But there can be a tipping point to where you're just in there, you know, at a point you're just burning up muscle and you're just wasting energy. You've passed that threshold of like what's beneficial and what's just, you know, taking up space or making dust basically with your movement. So the way I look at volume for myself is it's all in relation to my pumps. Am I starting to, if I hitting that peak pump, is there room to keep going? Maybe I can add more volume. And that's going to be like, so if I'm starting a training split and I have a baseline set of volume to start, I'm in a healthy surplus of calories because I'm always eating a lot. I'm going to assess that for a couple weeks, maybe 2 spins through my rotation. I might notice some things like, okay, this movement is going to take a lot out of me the stronger I get. So if I want to keep this movement in, I need to back down the work for these other movements. Little things like that, little feedback. That's what my training is for me, is constant feedback. And then how much, if I notice if I get a food bump from Dom, then I start to look at, can I increase my volume anywhere? Do I need to increase my volume anywhere? What do I want my working volume to be based off what am I trying to bring up? What responds really well for me? My delts respond really well. Probably don't need to push crazy amounts of volume there. You know, 6 sets, 7 sets, 8 sets a week is all I'm really going to need. Before I get too far into it, I'll kick it over to you. Like, what are some things you look for, I guess, for measuring your own volume within your training?
Yeah, I mean, besides 10 years of training and data to decide, you know, what feels good, what I connect well with, what responds well. Yeah, I think a big one is in terms of like deciding how much volume to do, I think the big one is letting the physique and the needs of the physique drive that.
Yeah.
For me, like you were just saying that your shoulders are your strongest point. We're a good comparison because that's the complete opposite for me. I could not possibly have enough shoulder. And it seems like they respond to higher volume for me. So, man, I've had different phases where gear's high, sleep is great, food is very high, and training is just my life. And I've tried higher ends of volumes, maybe outside of even what people would tell you. There's the super hardcore, you could do 2 sets and move on and then you're done. Like that didn't work for me for certain body parts. So it comes down to like, firstly, the needs of the physique. That should give you an idea of how much volume you should start with. And then based on training and the feedback, then you adjust from there. So like you were saying, pumps is a good one to get an eye out for. Like if let's say you want to bring up your chest, and let's say you start with 8 sets of chest over the course of the week. Say you're hitting it twice. In one session, if those 4 working sets leave something to be desired where you feel pumped, but you're like, this is not that skin splitting, bursting full pump, then you can probably handle some. I think a part of that too is you're going to need to gauge the soreness also after the fact. So it's like I'm gauging the pumps in the gym while I'm there, but then I'm also going to gauge the recovery after that session. So it's like in the next day or two, if I'm not sore at all and the pumps were not wild, those are 2 good proxies, I guess you could say, that could give you an idea. Hey, I could probably handle more. If you do those 4 sets and you're bursting full, and then the next day you are crazy sore when you do this and open up, then that's probably a good number. And then the final piece of the puzzle, for me at least, in terms of gauging how much volume to do, is performance the next time I train that muscle. So like, let's say I hit those, on Monday, I'm going to hit 4 sets of chest. If I come back Thursday and my performance is way down, then it's probably too much within the session. That Monday session was probably too much then. Whereas like if I come back Thursday and I'm unaffected, like I haven't trained my chest all week, then again, probably a good sign that you could move things up if need be.
Mm-hmm. And I think, it's important to understand for the listeners that volume isn't just necessarily reps and sets, it's intensity equals volume too. So I saw that you said in the Facebook group that like 4 all out sets for your quads is all you need across your training split. So that's very similar to like I need 1 day for delts and I don't need any more frequency other than 1 day. But as far as like in my case, I use a lot of intensifiers. I drive my volume up that way, whether it be drop sets, holds, pauses, forced stretches, stuff like that, to where I'm really getting stuck in 1 or 2 sets, but I'm taking that set to the brink of failure every single time. And that's my volume, rather than I have some movements where I might get into like 3 or 4 sets, and it's more just really focusing on the stimulus of the movement rather than progression in reps or load. But for me, and this is, John Jewett kind of alluded to that in our last podcast about you have to balance how you like to train with what you need in order to become better. And that's where it is for me, is like, I'm not a guy who enjoys everything to be 3 or 4 sets. I will get bored. I feel like I have a pretty good connection with every muscle group. So for me, it's like if I'm just sitting there doing curl after curl after curl, it's like I start looking at the clock, like how much longer am I going to be here? I need a little bit of that, like, all right, I have this 1 or 2 sets, nothing left, nothing after this. And then I can really tap into it mentally and take it to failure. And that's my volume. So I think in knowing how your split is broken down, if you're going to use intensity or you're just going to stick to straight reps across the sets, is important too, because intensity does equal volume.
Yeah. And it's a big piece of it. Like, I think one point that I would like to make while we're on this discussion is the habit that a lot of people within our industry have when this conversation comes up, when we're talking about volume and or intensity, it's like people put them as two separate groups and they have like this all out loyalist opinion about one or the other. Like, you know, we have the high volume camp and then we have the high intensity camp. And it's like, no, like these are two things that are just part of the recipe. It's not one or the other. They come together and make the final product.
You
And
ever see where people are like, it's almost like they say like, well, I want to train more like Jay Cutler. And then one camp's like, well, I want to train more like Dorian Yates. And it's like, you have to segue.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
have
No,
to choose a path.
it's a great point. And that a lot of times that is what guides it, is like, which bodybuilder did I have the greatest affinity for, or who was most relatable to my circumstance, and then I'm part of his team. For us, obviously, it was Dorian Yates. So it's like, man, I'm gonna warm up. I'm not gonna burn my energy and my strength while I'm warming up. I'm just gonna feel the weights, and then I'm getting to my top weight, and I'm fucking letting the roof off. Like, but then, like you just made a point about doing what you need to do versus what you want to do, there needs to be a balance, because that's how I wanted to train. I wanted to train high intensity till a shaky, ugly failure and then move on. Now, you may find across your journey that different training styles work for different body parts for you. So, for example, for me, I did the high intensity, low volume. And like I've talked about on this show, my legs blew up. My legs responded great to it. But then something like shoulders, arms, those two sets are just not enough. They just weren't growing. So, you know, at that point, you need more. So that's the difference. Like when you're talking about being or striving to be a high level competitive athlete, that's when things start to turn a little bit more towards what do you need to do versus what do you want to do. If you do not have competitive aspirations, I would say like 85% of your decision making should be based on what you want to do. But if you're wanting to be competitive, especially at a high level, and really force your body to look differently, that's a wild process. And so you're going to need to do what is required more so than what you want. In my case, that took a little bit of some maturing and a little bit of pushing like the emotional desire of training to the side and saying, hey, I just need to do more for these body parts if I want to be better.
Yeah. So you're making a lot of good points about your journey. I'm making a lot of good points about our journey. One thing I'm realizing is a lot of our listeners and a lot of the guys and girls I work with and you work with are much younger in their journey. So let's definitely backtrack as far as like you and I.
Yeah.
Let's talk early in your journey. How much attention did you pay to volume? What were your thoughts about how much do I need more? Do I need less? I think for me, it was more so I was so stuck on getting as strong as I could with what I was doing that I didn't think to add more because I was so hyper focused on strength. And I think with a lot of my younger people, I almost, once I find that baseline set of volume, which let's just be honest, it's not much. You don't need that much when you're younger and you need more tissue. Whether your lifestyle, non-competitive, competitive, whatever, you're all in the same camp. If your goal is to grow and you're younger, as far as training age or biological age, you don't need a ton of volume. You just need to focus on intensity and actually getting strong. I have people who ask me all the time, clients, you know, I might have a base program for them, like an upper lower split, say, and they'll ask me about adding a third set for everything. And I'm like, whoa, pump the brakes. You're talking about adding a third set on every movement across the entire week. That's like, could be 12 to 20 sets.
Yeah.
That's not right.
Right. You just doubled what you were doing.
Yeah. You just changed the whole metrics of the plan.
Right.
So I think that can seem like the thing to do if within those workouts they start not feeling like they're progressing because maybe strength is starting to slow down. And that's where I often remind people, that's where the mental component kicks in of like the mind leads the body. You know, plateaus aren't necessarily a reason to like, well, I can't go that way. I'm going to go over this way. Like, no, it just means like buckle down, hold tight for a few weeks. You're going to have to ride this out. You might have to get 8 reps, 3 sessions in a row before you finally get that 9th. I mean, you're going to leave there like, fuck yeah, I finally got that 9th. And So my back, bringing it all back is like, how were your thought processes about volume in the beginning? Say like year 2 to year 5.
Holy shit, year 2 to year 5. I'll say all right. So I would say years probably 1 to 3. The thought of adding more to whatever was originally set in place never crossed my mind. Never even, it's not that I was steadfast against doing it. It's that I just never even thought to do it. I didn't think that it was something that was needed because, like you said, it was more so, hey, you want to go in and do the basics, you want to get strong at the basics and be progressively stronger at the basics. So for me, it was just, it was, luckily I was pulled to progressive overload just immediately. I didn't have time early on where I kind of wasted it doing something else. And looking back, I probably way overdid the volume because, like you said, minimum effective dose, like you're brand new to training, you don't need much at all.
If you looked at a Flex magazine, any of us overdid the volume because we
Yeah,
did the workouts right out of the magazine.
Yeah, I had a J Color back workout that I did that was 16 or 20 working sets.
Yeah.
And I stuck with that for quite a while. Like didn't change off of it. And like it was like, this is how to get a big back. And then so that first like 1 to 3 years was more of like the Jay Cutler style, just a ton of training, like probably not even a whole lot of stuff near failure, like just pumping away. And then I did 10 or 12 and then I racked it.
Going through the motions, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was moving it. I was training hard, but you only know what you know.
Exactly.
But as far as like volume, I would say from that point when I got introduced and like found Dorian, that was when it was like, okay, getting strong and like just bringing these sets to the brink is really what you need to do. At that point, I was doing, it wasn't necessarily what he did and it was higher volume, but I would pick one bigger movement to start my day with. So if it was legs, it was barbell squat. If it was push or chest, it was a barbell press. If it was back, it was probably a deadlift. And I would do a 5x5 with that movement and then move to more of like a traditional, 2 or 3 set setup from that point after. And I would say, looking back, the work that I did 5x5 on a bigger movement was probably the only effective stuff I was doing. I would say that those were beneficial, or that was beneficial. And then anything else that I moved on to was probably just junk volume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think anybody listening can take away from that is like, volume probably isn't something you need to pay a whole lot of attention to in the early years. You just
I would be like almost cautious about it.
Yeah.
In terms of volume, not in terms of your training.
Definitely don't need more.
The opposite of cautious, almost like early on in your training. But in terms of like the volume, I want you younger guys to think about like saving those extra sets, the extra volume, save those as ace cards in the hole, because at some point you're going to advance and you're going to need to flip one of those cards to continue to progress. But until you get to that point, you guys should all understand at this point, minimum effective dose, we're using that philosophy across the board. If I can get you to grow on 400 milligrams of anabolics, why would I give you 700 milligrams? If I can get you to gain a pound a week on your diet plan, eating 500 grams of carbs, why would I give you 650 grams of carbs just to watch you get fat? So by the same token, if you're new to the gym and you're not used to doing any sets, why would you go in and do 30 sets for back? You could go in and do 5 sets for back and you're going to grow. You're probably going to be unbelievably sore, but you're going to grow. So, I think that's a good mentality to have. I mean, that goes into a lot of the themes that people will notice from this show at large, like play the long game. Context is king. Like if your context is that you're just starting and you want to be in this for a long time, there is no need to throw a bunch of shit at the wall and see what sticks. Just dial it back to the point that like you get great sets in, but then you can just move on and you're going to grow. So I think in terms of the volume idea or philosophy for younger trainees, it should be more about the quality of them, more so than the quantity of them.
Yeah, no, I'm in full agreement. I'm glad we covered that, especially just because I know it's a big demographic of the podcast, and it's a big demographic of the people you and I work with and attract. So
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think, it's so easy as a younger person to get influenced in so many different directions if you spend any amount of time on social media following different accounts, and
Oh
it's hard
man,
out there. You
dude,
gotta
you
you
can
gotta almost
find,
just
yeah,
you gotta
because
just
to your
stay.
point, dude, you can find conflicting information in the same 30 seconds if you scroll Instagram. I could scroll past you, and then I could scroll past somebody that does super high volume, and then within the same thing I could scroll past, Chris Tuttle, John Joe. Like, you're going to get a different opinion from everybody, so it is a lot. And I think, I will say, compared to when we were coming up, and like maybe say even like halfway through our journey, there was a ton of information then and a ton of information now. I do think the quality of the information and the quality of the people giving the information has really started to rise. So that's a positive. There's a lot of people that you can pull on and rely on to be a solid source of information. But it is a lot. You get all these people that want to talk evidence based, and you get a lot of people, I think, because of the RP guys, that push like crazy amounts of volumes, and they are escalating their volume as the training block goes on. And they say things like, hypertrophy is king, volume is king and intensity is queen, and all these things. Like, you hear these polarizing comments that are usually used as a marketing ploy to kind of sell you on the idea that that person knows best, right? I have the secret sauce. But for the most part, man, I'm still, yes, there needs to be like a minimum threshold of volume. And if there's a body part that isn't responding, and intensity and technique are good, then yeah, there of course is a time and a place to add volume. But for the most part, I think like 5 years or less into like a really serious, competitive bodybuilding journey or physique development journey, I would err on the side of caution with your volume more so than overdoing it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just sitting here thinking, and I won't speak in absolutes, but I can't think of one person who's come to me that I've like taken what they were already doing for training and gave them more as far as
Yeah.
volume, unless they just weren't training at all.
Right.
Like, usually I'm like, we're gonna cut that in half. Oh, you're training 6 days a week, we're definitely going to 4 or 5. Like,
Yeah.
I'm usually pulling volume away, and I'm
Yeah.
not. I just don't have an instance where someone's come to me and I'm like, you're not doing enough. I'm gonna make you
Right.
do more.
Yeah. Well,
So
then that's a perfect example too. Like, in that case, a lot of times we both see it where it's like someone comes to us and says that they're doing, 20 sets in a session. And it's like, okay, I'm definitely cutting that at least in half. And then also, you're filming all of those sets and
yeah,
sending them to me.
exactly.
And then
Yeah.
now we see like, okay, 20 sets. You calling it 20 sets really means that there was 10 warm-up sets, and maybe you did 10 real sets. Like, a lot of times there's just a lot of junk volume. And a lot of times in this industry, man, it's just semantics. People are calling it 20 sets and they're counting their warm-ups. And then someone like you or I, we're not going to count our warm-ups, and we're going to say, I did 6 sets for the workout. And it leads to all this confusion, because it's like, man, if I was just an outsider or a beginner, you can scroll past one person and they say, I do 6 working sets per workout. And then you scroll past the next person and it's, I do 22 working sets a workout. And it's like, man, how in the world is there such a discrepancy? And I think a lot of times
Perspective.
and semantics, like just the way that we word things a lot of times. So now what about what's your perspective in terms of like specialized splits and moving volume around for particular body parts in that younger demographic? Like, let's say you have somebody that's 23, 24, Maybe they competed once or twice. They want to be competitive. They're all in, like we are. Are you giving these guys like specialized splits where it's like, man, we really need to specifically bring up the delts, or is it more of like a balanced idea when someone's that young? Like, what's your thought process when you get somebody like that?
I mean, if they've been training hard since they were like 16 or 17, then that's a different person. But if they've
Right. Like, let's say less than 5 years into it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably at that point, they're probably either they could fall into an upper lower where I'm focused more on frequency rather than specific body parts because everything needs to come up.
Yeah.
Or push pull legs, some sort of rendition of that where I take into account, what are the days you can't train? What's your work week like? Where does it make the most sense to have a leg day where you're going to be the most stress-free and have the most time in the gym? A lot of different factors, but I would say, most people I'm writing for, I don't do bro splits for almost anyone unless it's like a lifestyle person who just like, it's not the same as a competitive bodybuilder who's getting better for the stage. I really think a lot of people sleep on the value of an upper lower split, but I did it for 2 years straight. That's all I did is upper lower.
At what part of your journey did you do that?
2016 and 2017.
Okay.
So that was with Jordan Peters. That was like post DC on my own. Then I worked with Jordan, so that was like mountain dog to DC to upper lower, and then upper lower led to push pull legs, and then that led to Dusty writing my training and me doing DC for real, and boom. But so upper lower, I think, is like if you're a guy or a girl who's like maybe you've done a show, and at that point I'd already done 2 shows when I did upper lower. It was just like I went backwards, but I was getting so much frequency across the week. I was doing, at that time, I loved to just do the hardest shit possible. And I got to do all of those things across the week. I just had, it was either, I think I was training every other day.
Okay.
And it was just.
Now, how is that broken up? Not to get totally off the rails here, but like upper, lower, what's within upper and what's within lower? Is that another example where you're doing arms with legs?
Biceps was paired with legs. Everything else was on upper day.
Okay. So upper's a motherfucker of a day, huh?
But the uppers would stagger. So it's like you had a couple rotations. So
gotcha.
Upper one might start with more push focused and back with secondary.
Okay.
The second upper day would be back focused and push would be secondary. And then legs was legs, but there might be a hamstring quad emphasis difference.
Sure.
Biceps with biceps, but it's just focused on driving your frequency up. Like I talked about in the DC episode, is I'm giving yourself as many chances to grow across the year.
Yeah.
And I made good results. I don't think that's good after a certain point, because I think you can find ways to generate more hypertrophy. But for someone younger, what are we trying to do? We're trying to build that foundation as fast and efficient as possible.
Yes.
I was like a low end light heavyweight when I was doing that. I need to be a super to be competitive at the national level. So for me, it made sense to try to build my foundation as fast as possible.
Yeah.
Now, if I got someone who's like, and how I look at myself now versus how I look at someone who's like more ready and has like some dominant body parts.
Right.
And then I'm like, okay, you're probably maintenance volume there, but your delts absolutely suck. So we have to find a way to put as much delts in across the week as we can. And that's where that's where the training split kind of becomes so customized that it's like, maybe you have you have legs, but I'm going to have you start the day with 3 sets of laterals and then go do legs, because we need that work across the week. And rather than make your main delt day or push day, whatever you're doing, be so much volume that it just becomes like pointless at some point. Because that's how I am with biceps. Like 3 or 4 or 5 sets into a biceps, like I'm tapped. I've hit max pump. I can't even bend my fucking arm. So for me to add more volume to biceps, it makes sense to put it on a second day and then a third day if I really needed to bring up that body part.
Yeah, I asked that question of you just to get an idea, because it seems, again, you kind of get back what you put out. And a big piece of what I've liked to talk about on my own Instagram and in my own content is training, and training splits, designs, volume, all these different things. And because of that, I'm sharing my own experience as somebody that's 12 years into competitive bodybuilding, and someone that has specific needs as an advanced trainee within their physique. Like I talked about, I have, some deficiencies in my upper body compared to my legs. So my split matches that. And you can get interesting with it and creative with it. But because I talk about these things and put these things out a lot, when I do get that young guy that is interested in my service as a coach, part of the reason they are reaching out is because they've seen me talk through these rationales of how these splits might look. And then let's say this is a 22-year-old guy that's pretty balanced, nothing glaring that's missing, but not necessarily anything that's like a freaky body part either. And they want some type of specialized split. And, for the most part, that guy just needs to grow everywhere. You just, more so than anything, it's like skill acquisition at that point. So I love your idea of like the higher frequency, love the idea of like upper lower, or even if you're a real beginner or really early on in your journey, something, we've talked about this, like doing full body 3 or 4 times a week. And what that is going to do, training is a skill. So if you're in there, 4 or 5 days a week, hitting the same body parts, similar movement over and over and over again, high frequency, that speeds up the learning curve. Like if you were going to learn how to squat, actually, let me use a different example outside of bodybuilding. Like let's say you wanted to learn how to swing a golf club properly, right? Would you only swing a golf club once a week and then hope that you learn fast and get better fast? Like, no, you would probably go golfing, or you'd go to a golf range or whatever, probably 3 or 4 times a week, and it would speed up that learning curve. So I think it's the same thing for training. Now I will say, because there will be some clients of mine that listen to this and they're like, wow, this is contradictory, because I have a couple of guys that are somewhat rare instances that are fairly early in their journey, but they had a glaring weakness, or they had a glaring strength, and it was like, hey, we can kind of move away from this a little bit volume wise in order to make up some ground on everything else. You're still going to grow this main body part. Obviously, look at the way that it's responded to everything that you've done already. But I think for the most part, you're going to want to put some of these earlier trainees on something that just gets them in the gym often and hitting these similar patterns often, because it just will improve like those motor patterns, and it will improve their skill of actually training.
Yeah, I think, I mean, to really simplify it for people, if you look at a 12-month year and you go to the gym 4 times a week, 5 times a week for every week of that year, you will undoubtedly be better by the end of that year. Like,
oh, no question. Yeah.
So when we think, don't get so consumed with, oh, this is what my split is. Look at like the whole, what am I doing as a whole? I think a lot of like the paralysis by analysis comes from, discussions like this, but just like if you spend enough time on Instagram, you can be pulled that way to where your head starts to spin. And it's like, you start to question if you're doing anything right. And it's like, you're probably doing a lot more right than you realize. You just need to keep doing it. Like I saw a good quote today that my client Rachel posted. Starting isn't hard at all. It's just scary to take that first leap. It's about reminding yourself to consistently keep showing up along the journey. And that's where like you have all this influence on social media and from other people at your gym maybe. And you make a great point about training being a skill, not only in the technical aspect of like, these are the cues that you need for a squat or a row or a press, but also, when we think about the gym, like that's something that we do as well as live our daily lives. So you need the skill part also comes from, and I'll use myself as an example. Like when I finish recording this, I have to flip the switch mentally and get ready to go do legs. That
Yes.
is a skill. And knowing what leg day means to me and knowing that I need bigger legs and knowing that like what is required of me intensity wise and effort wise to build bigger legs and how I am going to bring that to this session. You know, you're not going to get the results that you don't intentionally give effort for over and over and over again. And I think the skill part comes from just never quitting, just always showing up and at least giving your best effort on that day. And we talk volume, we can talk frequency, intensity, all of that. But what matters most is just to keep showing up and honing in on those skills. Like you said, I mean, for me, it's relatable to baseball because the better I got was the more sadistic I got with my work ethic and my practice. Like I was taking 100 cuts a day every day for, I don't even remember a day I didn't do that growing up. 100 cuts a day, 100 swings with the bat every single day. Like just the fact of having the bat in my hand, and it's like it becomes a part of you. And that's how training is. I'm not telling people to train 7 days a week, but you know, you go to the gym to get better. Your warm-up sets, everything you do in that gym from the minute you walk through the door becomes something that contributes to you sharpening your skills and making your tools better.
Yeah, that's a great point, even about the warm-ups, because that's such an opportunity. Even for me, I think about that as someone that is advanced. And I don't mean to keep saying that like I'm some hotshot. I've just been doing this a long time. That's what I mean by that. So even for me, someone that's been doing this for a long time, I still go in and I'm intentional about my pre-training routine, how my body is moving. I'm intentional about my warm-ups. I am thinking about my warm-ups, the reps that I'm doing, warming up for top sets. I'm thinking about that like practice, like everything that I should or want to be feeling during my top set, in terms of setup, elbow path, all these different things, like that's your time to practice it. That way you reinforce, this is how my elbow should be moving. This is what it should feel at the bottom. That way, then when you add like that working type load to it, it's not a surprise. And then the form doesn't break down. Like if you've selected an appropriate load, it's not going to be a surprise. You're not learning it on the fly, which I think is something I see a lot of that in the gym. Like I see a lot of people trying to figure it out literally within their working set. And it's like, man, this is going to be really difficult. And I have a very tough time believing that your sets are going to yield you the best possible benefit. Man, there's so many times, and I was guilty of this when I was younger, but there's so many times I see people, I'll be doing some pre-training routine or whatever the case is. And I see people come in and like just throw their bag down and start leg pressing. And it's like, you know, where is the intention behind everything that you're doing? And I think about it a lot of times. I almost think about it like, you know, my pre-training routine, my stability work, and then intentional warm-ups leading into the top set is really how I've earned the right to enter that top set and attack it and approach it like, you know, with a high level of focus and intensity. So, you know, I know that some of that stuff isn't always fun. Pre-training mobility stuff isn't fun. Even warm-ups, it's easy to just mindlessly go through them and want to get to the fun stuff, but there is a big value in it. And then, you know, like the big theme of this episode is volume. If you start taking your warm-up sets really seriously, really intentional, you're really trying to pull something from them, all of a sudden now maybe you get away with less actual volume and your training performance goes up, you grow, but then you're still able to recover and there's still room to go with volume because you're getting the most out of the little work that you are actually doing. So you mentioned that about the warm-ups, and I just think it's a overlooked part of training itself. So I thought that was a great point.
I mean, at this point of where I'm at, my training is shit without my warm-ups. Like without that,
Yeah.
10 minutes with a PVC pipe, doing my band work if I'm doing upper body, doing my 90/90s if I'm doing anything lower body, shoulder cars, whatever the day brings. Like,
Yes.
I have a
Yep.
set for everything. And there's even a song I play the same song because it's about 9 or 10 minutes long while I warm up, and it's just like whatever I got going on outside the gym stays there. All my client work, my personal life, anything going, I don't care.
What's
Like,
the
I came to
song?
the gym clearly at, like, if the world's on fire, it's still going to be there when I get done. And that's what that warm up is for, is to separate yourself from that part of your life so you can give your best to your training.
Yeah.
And then you're going to leave feeling, having the endorphins from training and feeling almost like uplifted and empowered that you got through that session. And then that's a skill. I don't care what anyone says. Like, that is a skill. We talk about bodybuilding being a sport or not, and whether it is or isn't, I don't really care. I never argue about it, but the skills necessary to get good at something are just like sports. Kobe Bryant talked about, he was never surprised when he hit a game-winning shot because he had hit that shot thousands of times in practice already. And I think about that. I'm like, there's no surprise when I hit a new PR, I get a number that I was going after because I manifested it by my same rituals that I do every single time going into that. So to your point about, warm-ups might be boring, mobility, that stuff, but those are the little 0.5% that start to add up. And the longer you stay on the journey, progress becomes harder to measure because it doesn't come as fast. So you have to do these little micro, what might seem like minutia, but these are the little details, the trivial things that are going to add up to you continuing to be able to measure progression, which is going to lead to you sticking with what you're doing. That's what the patience to do all these little things is, what fuels your passion, and maybe gets you to a point where you're talking to your buddy on a podcast 10 years down the line. I don't know, but that's where we're at.
Yeah. Man, and those, like you were saying, there's a level of like, you have to have a level of patience to go through those things because they are boring. Man, I would say more than half of the time I walk into the gym, I'm like, man, I don't feel like fucking going upstairs and doing this shit. Like, I really don't. I really do not. But my training has taken off from really, I've made it a non-negotiable with myself. Yeah, I know you're big on that. And I love that type of messaging and self-talk where it's like, this is a phrase I'm going to steal from you too, where it's like, I made a contract with myself and I'm not breaking this. This is a non-negotiable for me. If I step foot in this gym and I plan on going about this training that I have on this piece of paper, there's things that I need to get to first before I get to the training. I have to earn that right to the training. And I want to go back, we're getting a little outside of like actual X's and O's of volume, but I thought it was interesting that you mentioned it because I'm big on this too, but you mentioned that you have one song that's, 9 or 10 minutes or whatever it is, and you let that just play through. You don't look at the phone after you've turned it on. And like that's kind of getting you into the mindset to train. That almost reminds me of like I may butcher the name, but I'll be able to explain it. So like the Pavlov's dogs, I don't know if I'm saying that right or if I even have the right name, but there's like
it's just dog, Pavlov's dog.
Oh, okay. But there's the general idea was that, this guy conditioned his dog based on sounds, and like he had like a bell or whatever the case was that would notify the dog that it was time to eat or time to do this or time to do that. And I've heard about this where, same thing, no different. You can use music as almost like this like Pavlovian trigger where I'm the same way. I have a mini playlist. I don't have just the one song, but I have like a mini playlist that's like 12 minutes. And I just, every time I start my pre-training routine, I click play and then put the phone away and it plays in the same order. Nothing ever changes. And it's like, man, by the time that last song ends, that's usually right as I'm finishing that pre-training routine and I'm ready. Like I have no choice but to be ready now. It's almost like I'm a different person, like I'm a different version of myself in that moment than I am when I sit on this podcast with you or when I take my girlfriend to dinner or when I sit and talk to my parents, those are all different versions of me. So you need to your point, like I like this idea that you were talking about it, like you need to be able to harness these different avatars. I'm stealing that from Ben Pekulski. I've heard him use that, where you have different avatars, different versions of yourself that you have to turn into based on what the setting is. So I don't really know what the grand point of that was, but it was just interesting. The idea that you had reached that kind of same like musical trigger that I had in my own training just intuitively. And I think it's something that people can definitely use. I mean, I don't want to get too far outside of the volume discussion here before we wrap up, but just thought it was a good point. So where are we at? Any other considerations maybe that we didn't generally touch on for volume? I mean, we could talk about this literally for 10 days straight.
I mean, we've touched on it briefly, but the relation of frequency to volume.
Yeah.
So that's something I feel like you have the big three, in my opinion: intensity, frequency, volume. None matters more than the other, but all three are interconnected in some way or another. Like I kind of touched on it with my bicep training. Like for me, increasing the volume of a session or of biceps for one session probably isn't the move, rather than to spread that volume out across the training split, whether that's 7 days, 8 days, 6 days, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Again, typically people that I have working with that I like are on an upper lower split or maybe a push pull legs, there's probably no need in rare circumstances, maybe, that I'm going to increase volume. I just don't see it being a thing until I start to see some discrepancies coming. Like I talked about with DC, like it's built on high frequency, putting on as much size as you can. And then once you get to a point where it's hard to keep adding mass just for the sake of adding mass, then you start to look at the physique and, oh, I need delt. Okay, delt volume goes up. Oh, my hamstrings are lagging, but my quads are blown out. Okay, that's something. Like everybody's different. How, like, you didn't know that you were going to get or bigger quads when you started. I didn't know that my back was going to be what it is. Like it just, and typically in the beginning, for most people listening can relate, you attach to what grows the quickest. That becomes your favorite body part to train because it's your most responsive. You know what I mean? Like I love
not only and not only most responsive, but no coincidence, usually that's the muscle that person feels the most. So then it's like, you get in the gym and it's like, man, for me, and I'll give you my own personal example. It was like, man, I truly can go sit. I could walk into a gym, no warm up, sit on a leg extension machine and literally just pick any random weight, do one set where I just try hard, and I will step off of that and my quads are blown up. Whereas I can do a full shoulder stability, mobility, pre-training routine, go in and then start my session with 6 sets of laterals on a machine that I connect well with, that lines up properly. And it's like, usually most of the time I get off it, my shoulder pumps are like, eh.
Yeah.
So it's like, I would say I hate to train my shoulders because it doesn't feel like anything is happening. Whereas like I go in and train legs and I'm crawling out of the place. Like, yeah, that's my favorite body part to train. I feel it the most.
That's like chest. Like I have the most volume for my chest over my delts, but does it give me the most joy? No. If anything,
right.
Chest day is almost like it's next to an arm day as far as like the intensity I'm going to need, because leg day, all out, I get to flip that switch. Back day, all out, I get to flip that switch. But chest day requires a lot more technique and focus and make sure the muscles driving me, not my emotions. So
yeah, for sure.
It's my least favorite day. But so frequency, we can increase volume through the frequency of our training. That's why in a split, like an upper lower DC, whatever, push pull legs, that's focused on high frequency, we don't necessarily maybe need to touch volume depending on the individual, because the volume's already accounted for with the high frequency.
Right.
So when we get to something like what I'm currently doing, where technically I'm only hitting each body part once a week, other than hams gets hit twice. If I wanted to increase my volume, I would look at increasing the frequency rather than the volume per session, because it's already pretty high. and it's just another tool in the toolbox. Like, how's your week
Yeah.
broken down? How many days can you train? How many days are you?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean add a whole nother day to your week. That would completely throw off everything. But what it means is when we talk about adding volume too, we're not talking about like monumental increases. It might be like, I have 10 sets for my chest. Let's try 11.
I'm talking one set.
Yeah, let's try 11 and see
Yeah.
what's affected.
Yeah.
Because if adding 1 or 2 sets, maybe it's good for that body part, but the rest of your body parts start to suffer recovery wise, then
Yes.
that becomes no good.
Right.
We have a
And what
recovery
are,
budget.
and one set of what? What are we talking about? Are we talking about adding one set of cable curls, or are we talking about one set of fucking heel elevated safety bar squats? Like, it's a different thing. You know what I mean? So, as we love to say, context is king there. And the point on another point on frequency too, that's a great way. No stipulation on training age or where you are in your journey. Higher frequency is an excellent way of getting a higher quality of work in for the volume that you're doing. You can do 10 sets for arms on one day, or let's say you could do 12 sets of arms on one day, or you could do them spread across 3 days and you do 4 sets per. I promise you, you're going to be able to put more focus and intensity and effort into 4 sets than you are 12 in one session. By the time I get to fucking 7 or 8 working sets on a muscle, I'm like, I'm out of here. Like, this is, I'm no longer doing anything productive.
That's me too. I'm looking at the clock, like, what else do I have to do today? Like, this is,
yeah.
I've
So
got
it's like, I'd
my
rather smash it. I'd rather fucking smash those 4 sets and then come back in 3 days and do it again.
Mhm. And I think one thing to also mention is the detriments of too much volume would be decreased recovery, and what that could be seen as, like joints, desire to train, all the reasons we
All of
see
it.
we've talked about for needing to deload could be not because the poundages are too heavy, but just because you're doing too much.
100%. I think volume is the greatest. Volume is the greatest driver of training fatigue. That's why we see, you know, what happens in contest prep when calories are low, output is high. What do? You don't say, hey, just back off the intensity, back off the load, do really light shit. No, we say keep the intensity high, keep the load high, and let's just bring back some of the fatigue or some of the volume that you're actually doing in order to uphold this training performance. So that should tell you right there as a telltale sign, volume is going to drive that fatigue more than anything. And if you do that for an extended period of time, like if you really fuck up and do way too much volume, way under recover for a long time, not only are you not going to progress, you may even regress. I have seen people do too much for too long and they start to look worse. And then it's a trip when you dial everything back and do half of what that person was doing, and they start to grow, they start to put body weight back on.
You can create a nasty hormonal and metabolic environment too from those things too. If you push
dude, that's a good way to end up sick. Like there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on. And I want to say, anybody that's watching the video, I apologize. I started the episode with a window open for some natural light. It gets dark at fucking 5 o'clock here in New Jersey right now. So now it looks like I'm a storyteller from a horror movie, but it is what it is.
I love the transition. It's been great.
I've been trying to find different stuff. I'm like, how about this? Horror story, do too much volume.
Campfire. Ghost story.
That's all. That's what I got. Light wise. And I think we're probably
that
at an
covers it.
hour.
I mean, like you said, this debate will go on for another 30 years. So it's,
and I liked your idea too. I don't know if I should spoil it and say it out loud, but this is something that we will undoubtedly revisit. And then I think that how we revisit it and approach the next conversation on volume, I think a big part of that will be based on what the people want in terms of maybe anything we didn't touch on or anything they'd want us to expand on. So again, if you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment underneath because we are going to get back to this topic. And definitely if you're part of the Facebook group, please leave us a comment about this. And I think that's all, man. What do you think?
another one down.
Another one down. So Thanks everybody for listening. Thanks to everybody that's joined and contributed to the Facebook group, like we talked about. Even if you've just sent a message along to Tommy or I, that goes a long way. So we appreciate it. We're going to keep coming at you guys every week as we've promised. And that's all. So for Tommy Stiles, I'm Joseph PIRCHER. This was a Thinking Man's podcast. And until next time, guys, we are out.